Across the ancient world, countless civilizations rose from deserts, mountains, jungles, and forgotten islands, leaving behind monuments that still challenge human understanding today. Massive stone cities stand in places where no empire should have survived. Underground chambers disappear beneath sacred temples. Ancient walls, carved with impossible precision, continue to resist time as if they were built for a future far beyond their age. Some of these places were hidden beneath forests for centuries. Others vanished under sand, water, or volcanic ash, only to return like echoes from a lost chapter of human history. From mysterious temples aligned with unknown purposes to abandoned cities filled with unanswered questions, each ruin carries fragments of a story humanity still cannot fully explain. Tonight, we journey into the greatest ancient mysteries ever discovered, places where archaeology meets legend, and where every stone seems to whisper that history may be far stranger than we were taught. Hidden deep within the sandstone canyons of Gansu province in northwestern China, the Bingling Temple caves are not simply another collection of ancient Buddhist shrines. They are an impossible city of stone suspended above the Yellow River. More than 180 caves, thousands of sculptures, and centuries of human devotion carved directly into vertical cliffs in one of the most isolated landscapes on Earth. Even today, approaching the site feels less like visiting a monument and more like discovering a forgotten civilization buried inside a canyon. Massive Buddhas emerge from the rock face without warning. Wooden walkways cling precariously to sheer walls. Dark chambers disappear into the mountain itself. And everywhere, there are traces of a world that should not have been able to exist here at all. The first mystery of Bingling is its location. The caves were established during the 4th and 5th centuries, a time when this region stood on the dangerous frontier of the Silk Road. But unlike the grand capitals of ancient China, Bingling was isolated far from major urban centres. The surrounding terrain is harsh, dry, unstable, and surrounded by towering cliffs cut by the Yellow River over millions of years. Reaching the site in antiquity would have required days of travel through narrow mountain corridors vulnerable to bandits, floods, landslides, and violent desert winds. Yet despite the remoteness, generations of monks, craftsmen, patrons, and pilgrims somehow transformed this cliffside into one of the largest sacred cave complexes in Asia. The scale alone raises immediate questions. The complex stretches across a vast section of canyon wall, with caves stacked vertically at dangerous heights. Some chambers are positioned so high above the river that modern visitors still rely on narrow suspended pathways to reach them. Archaeologists continue to debate how ancient workers managed construction in such an unforgiving environment nearly 1,500 years ago. There were no modern cranes, steel scaffolding, or reinforced anchors. Every statue, every mural, every timber walkway had to be built while hanging over empty space. One mistake would have meant death. The most visually overwhelming structure is the colossal Buddha, carved directly into the cliff face during the 6th century. Rising approximately 27 meters high, the figure dominates the canyon like a silent guardian watching over the river below. But unlike freestanding statues built block by block, this figure was created by removing the mountain itself. Workers first cut deep into the sandstone cliff, then shaped the remaining rock into the body of the Buddha before applying layers of clay, pigment, and decorative detail. The engineering challenge was extraordinary. The sandstone here is fragile and vulnerable to erosion. Entire sections of cliff have collapsed over the centuries, yet large portions of the sculpture still survive after more than a millennium of floods, earthquakes, temperature swings, and desert winds. Inside the caves, the mysteries become even stranger. Some chambers are massive ceremonial halls lined with towering sculptures and painted walls. Others are so small they can barely fit a single person. These tiny cells may have been used for meditation, isolation rituals, or private religious practices lost to history. Many caves contain overlapping layers of construction from different dynasties, including the Northern Wei, Sui, Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing periods. The result is a site that feels almost geological in its complexity, as if centuries of belief accumulated layer upon layer inside the mountain. One of the most fascinating aspects of Bingling is the artistic style itself. The caves do not look entirely Chinese. Many statues possess elongated faces, deep-set eyes, sharp noses and flowing robes more closely associated with Central Asian or Gandharan Buddhist art. These features reveal the immense cultural exchange moving across Eurasia during the Silk Road era. Traders, monks, translators, and pilgrims carried not only goods, but ideas, symbols, architectural techniques, pigments, and religious philosophies across thousands of kilometers. Bingling became a crossroads where Indian Buddhism, Central Asian aesthetics, and Chinese traditions fused into something entirely unique. The murals preserve evidence of this interaction in astonishing detail, though many have faded traces of vibrant pigments still cling to the cave walls after more than 1,000 years. Reds, blues, golds, and mineral greens survive in an environment exposed to moisture, wind, and dramatic temperature changes. Ancient craftsmen developed sophisticated mixtures using crushed minerals, clay binders, plant-based compounds, and layered application techniques to ensure the paintings bonded to the rock surface. Some sections remain so well preserved that individual folds in robes and facial expressions are still visible. The durability of these pigments continues to surprise conservation scientists today. Yet Bingling is not simply a story of creation. It is also a story of destruction and survival. Over the centuries, earthquakes shattered chambers, floods damaged access routes, and political upheaval transformed the religious landscape of China. Certain statues were deliberately defaced, faces were destroyed, murals were painted over, entire caves were abandoned and sealed off by rockfalls for generations. In some areas, archaeologists discovered evidence that later dynasties repaired or reshaped older sculptures, effectively rewriting the visual identity of the site. Bingling became a living monument constantly altered by time, faith, and power. Its isolation may ultimately be the reason so much survived at all. Unlike other famous cave complexes that evolved into major tourist or political centres, Bingling remained hidden within the canyon system for centuries. Access was so difficult that many chambers were rarely visited. Before modern infrastructure and reservoirs changed the surrounding landscape, reaching the caves often required dangerous river travel through narrow gorges. That remoteness protected murals, sculptures, and inscriptions that might otherwise have disappeared entirely. Even now, the environment surrounding the caves feels surreal. The cliffs rise almost vertically from the water, creating the impression that the mountain itself has been hollowed out by an extinct civilization. During certain hours of the day, shadows cover the cave entrances while the giant Buddha remains illuminated by reflected light from the canyon walls. The effect is almost cinematic. Massive stone figures appear suspended between darkness and sunlight, emerging from the mountain as if they were always part of it. Modern archaeological work continues to uncover new information about how the site evolved. Inscriptions found within several caves provide rare chronological records, allowing historians to trace phases of expansion over hundreds of years. Researchers have also identified evidence of advanced timber reinforcement systems hidden within some cliffside structures. These wooden elements helped stabilize walkways and outer cave facades, despite constant exposure to erosion. The survival of such engineering solutions across centuries demonstrates a deep understanding of both geology and structural stress long before modern engineering existed. Far from the crowded archaeological circuits of Egypt, Greece, or Mesopotamia, hidden among the dry granite hills of central Tanzania, lies one of the most mysterious prehistoric landscapes in Africa. Kondoa Rock Art Sites is not a ruined city. There are no pyramids, no temples, no colossal statues rising above the earth. At first glance, the region appears almost empty. Endless savanna, thorn bushes, fractured boulders, and silent cliffs weathered by thousands of years of heat and wind. But concealed within those cliffs is a network of ancient rock shelters, carrying thousands of paintings left behind by civilizations that vanished long before recorded history reached this part of the continent. Some of these images may have survived for over 2,000 years. Others could be even older. And despite decades of study, archaeologists still cannot fully explain who created them, why certain locations were chosen, or what many of the symbols were ever meant to represent. The scale of Kondoa is one of the first things that unsettles researchers. The site is not a single cave or isolated cluster of paintings. It is an enormous ritual landscape spread across hundreds of square kilometers, containing more than 150 known decorated rock shelters. Many are hidden so carefully within the terrain that they remain nearly invisible until standing directly beneath them. From a distance, some appear to be nothing more than cracks in the granite hills. Others are concealed behind dense vegetation, or positioned high above narrow ravines that are difficult to access even today. Entire galleries of prehistoric imagery survived for centuries simply because nature swallowed them whole. What makes Kondoa especially fascinating is that it does not belong to one civilization. The paintings were created across vast stretches of time by different cultural groups who may never have spoken the same language or shared the same beliefs. Layer after layer of imagery overlaps on the rock surfaces, forming a visual timeline that spans generations. Some paintings are associated with ancient hunter-gatherer communities. Others appear connected to later pastoralist societies that introduced cattle culture into the region. In certain shelters, older red figures are partially covered by newer white geometric designs, suggesting that later groups returned to the exact same sacred places long after the original artist disappeared. The continuity is extraordinary. Something about these cliffs remained spiritually important for centuries, yet nobody knows precisely what drew people back again and again. The paintings themselves range from surprisingly realistic animal scenes to deeply abstract symbols that resist modern interpretation. Human figures stretch unnaturally across the rock walls with elongated limbs and distorted proportions. Some appear to wear animal heads. Others seem frozen mid-dance, arms raised toward invisible forces. There are giant figures towering above smaller humans, strange circular motifs, dotted lines, lattice patterns, and shapes that resemble ritual masks or transformed bodies. Certain scenes depict hunting expeditions with remarkable movement and detail. Others feel almost supernatural, as though the artists were attempting to portray visions rather than reality. Many archaeologists believe the art was never intended as simple decoration. Increasing evidence suggests that at least some shelters functioned as ritual spaces tied to altered states of consciousness, spiritual ceremonies, or forms of shamanic practice. This theory becomes even more compelling when considering the physical environments of the shelters themselves. Several are positioned in locations with unusually powerful acoustics where chants or percussion can echo through the stone chambers. Some are isolated far from practical habitation zones, requiring deliberate journeys through difficult terrain. Others contain visual compositions placed precisely where sunlight strikes the rock at particular times of day. The landscape appears carefully chosen not for survival, but for ceremony. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Kondoa is the astonishing survival of its pigments. The majority of the older paintings were created using red pigments believed to derive from iron-rich minerals such as hematite. Researchers suspect these materials were mixed with organic binding agents, including tree sap, animal fat, blood, or plant extracts. Yet the exact formulas remain uncertain. This matters because many of the paintings are exposed to open air rather than sealed deep inside caves. For thousands of years they endured seasonal rain, intense ultraviolet radiation, dust carried across the savanna, and dramatic fluctuations in temperature. Despite this, many figures still retain vivid coloration. In certain shelters, the reds remain startlingly powerful against the pale granite background. It is a reminder that ancient societies often possessed material knowledge far more sophisticated than modern assumptions allow. The geological setting of Kondoa also contributes to its atmosphere. The region is dominated by massive granite outcrops shaped over immense spans of time through erosion and tectonic pressure. These natural stone formations created overhangs, chambers, and sheltered walls that prehistoric artists transformed into sacred canvases. Unlike monumental civilizations that imposed architecture onto the landscape, the creators of Kondoa worked with the terrain itself. The cliffs became part of the ritual experience. The boundaries between natural environment and human expression almost disappeared. For local communities living near Kondoa today, some shelters still carry spiritual significance. Certain sites are associated with rainmaking ceremonies or ancestral traditions that survived long after the original meanings of the paintings faded. This continuity adds another layer to the mystery. The area may represent one of the oldest surviving sacred landscapes in East Africa, a place where spiritual practices evolved across centuries while remaining tied to the same stone hills. Yet for all the research conducted here, enormous gaps remain. Archaeologists still debate the true age of many paintings because organic material suitable for radiocarbon dating is extremely limited. The identities of the earliest artists remain uncertain. The meanings of numerous symbols are completely unknown. Even the reasons why specific shelters became sacred while others remained untouched are still unclear. Kondoa exists in a frustrating space between visibility and silence. The paintings are physically present, yet the people who made them left no written explanations behind. That silence is precisely what gives the site its power. Modern civilization is obsessed with permanence. Concrete, steel, digital records, satellites constantly observing the planet from above. But in Kondoa, entire systems of belief survived not through monuments or texts, but through fragile layers of pigment hidden inside forgotten stone shelters. Long before kingdoms rose across East Africa, before maps named these hills, before colonial borders divided the continent, unknown artists climbed into the granite wilderness and covered the rock with symbols that still refuse to fully surrender their meaning. At the bottom of a quiet artificial lake in eastern China, beneath nearly 40 meters of dark water, an entire ancient city still stands. Stone archways rise from the lake bed like the ruins of a drowned kingdom. Staircases vanish into green darkness. Carved dragons remain frozen in silence. Streets once crowded with merchants, scholars and soldiers now lie untouched beneath drifting sediment and cold freshwater currents. This is Xicheng, the Lion City, one of the most surreal lost cities on Earth. Unlike legendary places such as Atlantis, Xicheng is not myth. Its destruction happened recently enough to be photographed, documented and remembered by living generations. In 1959, during the rapid industrial expansion of Mao-era China, the government flooded the valley to create the Jinan River hydroelectric dam. Entire towns disappeared beneath the rising water. Nearly 300,000 people were relocated. Mountains became islands, valleys became reservoirs. And Xicheng, a city with a history stretching back more than 13 centuries, vanished beneath what is now Qiandao Lake, the thousand-island lake. Most ancient cities are destroyed slowly. Fire, earthquakes, invasions, weather, looting, and time erase them piece by piece until only fragments remain. Xicheng experienced something entirely different. The moment the reservoir filled, the city was sealed away from sunlight, wind, oxygen, and human interference. Water became a protective tomb. Instead of decaying, the city entered a strange form of preservation, almost like a civilization suspended in time. When divers began exploring the ruins decades later, they expected scattered debris. What they found instead felt impossible. Massive city gates were still standing upright. Intricate stone carvings remained visible on walls and arches. Wooden beams had not completely rotted away. Entire streets could still be followed through the darkness. Some structures appeared so intact that they resembled abandoned movie sets, rather than ruins submerged for half a century. Xicheng was originally established during the Eastern Han period and later flourished during the Ming and Qing dynasties. It served as an important political and economic center in Zhejiang province for centuries. Historical records describe a thriving city surrounded by mountains, strategically positioned along trade routes crossing the region. But very little prepared archaeologists for the scale preserved beneath the lake. The city was not a small settlement. It contained ceremonial gates, administrative compounds, residential districts, temples, memorial arches, and complex road systems. Some estimates suggest the submerged area stretches across dozens of football fields. Beneath the water lies the skeletal framework of an entire urban world. Traditional Chinese wooden structures are notoriously vulnerable to moisture and time, yet parts of Xicheng remain remarkably stable after decades underwater. Researchers believe the lake's unique environment played a critical role. The freshwater reservoir contains relatively low levels of salt, marine organisms, and destructive currents compared to ocean environments. The cold, dark conditions also reduced biological decay. In essence, the lake accidentally became a giant preservation chamber. Many of Xicheng's carved surfaces remain astonishingly sharp. Dragons twist across stone facades with scales still visible. Mythical beasts guard collapsed entrances. Floral patterns survive in extraordinary detail. Some inscriptions remain readable despite decades submerged beneath tons of water pressure and sediment. The craftsmanship reveals the immense technical skill of Ming and Qing artisans. Precision stonework designed not merely for beauty, but endurance. The city's iconic lion imagery adds another layer of symbolism. Xicheng translates to Lion City, likely referencing the nearby Five Lion Mountain. Yet beneath the lake, the name takes on an eerie second meaning. Stone lions appear trapped in eternal stillness, guardians watching over a civilization buried by modernity. Unlike ancient ruins lost to forgotten catastrophes, Xicheng was sacrificed deliberately. Engineers knew the city would disappear forever beneath the reservoir. Historical preservation was considered secondary to industrial progress. China in the 1950s was racing toward electrification, infrastructure, and economic transformation. Ancient architecture became collateral damage. To some, Xicheng represents the tragic destruction of irreplaceable cultural heritage. To others, it symbolizes the brutal choices nations make during modernization. Entire chapters of history were drowned so that electricity could reach expanding cities and factories. In many ways, Xicheng is not simply an ancient mystery. It is a modern one, a reminder of how quickly civilizations can erase their own past. For nearly 50 years, the city faded from public consciousness. Locals remembered it. Older generations spoke about the flooded streets beneath the lake, but to the outside world, Xicheng became little more than a rumour beneath the water. Then came the divers. In the early 2000s, underwater exploration teams returned to the site with modern equipment. What emerged shocked even experienced archaeologists. Sonar mapping revealed organised street grids still intact beneath the lake. Underwater photography captured elaborate architecture hidden in darkness for decades. High-powered lights illuminated carved walls untouched by sunlight since the 1950s. Viewers compared Xicheng to Atlantis, but the comparison almost understates the reality. Atlantis has never been proven to exist. Xicheng does exist. Entire avenues, staircases, temples and gates remain beneath the lake at this very moment. Divers can swim through windows once occupied by families. They can drift across roads where merchants once traded silk and grain. Few places on Earth create such a direct collision between the ancient world and modern technology. Visibility underwater is limited. Sediment clouds easily. Many areas remain too dangerous or fragile for constant diving. To reconstruct the city, researchers increasingly rely on sonar imaging, underwater drones, photogrammetry, and three-dimensional digital mapping. Ironically, a city built over 1,000 years ago can only be fully understood using some of the most advanced imaging systems ever created. This contrast gives Xicheng its uniquely haunting identity. It is ancient yet modern, lost yet perfectly real, destroyed yet strangely preserved. Ancient ruins on land are alive with weather, animals, tourists, and movement. Xicheng has none of that. Beneath the lake, everything is still. No wind touches the streets. No sunlight reaches the gates. The city exists in permanent twilight, suspended between memory and oblivion. Across the dry northern edge of Sri Lanka, where salt winds sweep across the Jaffna Peninsula and the Indian Ocean stretches toward southern India, the ruins of an ancient city sit almost unnoticed beneath the trees. No towering pyramids rise above the landscape. No colossal statues dominate the horizon. Instead, scattered across a quiet archaeological field are dozens of small grey stone domes, silent, weathered, and strangely repetitive. At first glance, they appear modest, but beneath this understated surface lies one of the most unusual and historically disruptive ancient sites in South Asia. Kandarodai was once a thriving urban centre connected to international trade routes, Buddhist networks, and maritime civilizations stretching across the Indian Ocean. Yet somehow, over the course of centuries, it almost vanished from history entirely. Archaeologists believe the city flourished more than 2,000 years ago, during a period when merchant ships crossed constantly between Sri Lanka, southern India, Arabia, and even the Roman world. The location alone explains why Kandarodai mattered. Positioned near critical maritime corridors at the northern tip of Sri Lanka, it occupied one of the most strategically valuable points in the ancient Indian Ocean. Any vessel moving between the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea would have passed near these waters. Long before European empires turned the Indian Ocean into a battlefield of colonial trade, this region already functioned as one of the busiest commercial systems on Earth. Excavations revealed that Kandarodai was not an isolated religious settlement buried in the wilderness. It was a functioning urban environment tied directly to international exchange. Roman coins discovered at the site suggest contact with Mediterranean trade networks during the early centuries of the Common Era. Imported ceramics, South Indian artifacts, and regional coinage point toward a city deeply integrated into long-distance commerce. For historians, this creates one of the most fascinating contradictions surrounding the ruins. The modern landscape feels remote and forgotten, yet 2,000 years ago this may have been one of the most globally connected locations in the region. But trade alone is not what makes Kandarodai mysterious. The true anomaly lies in its architecture. At the centre of the site stands an arrangement unlike almost anything else in Sri Lankan archaeology. Dozens of miniature stupas, small dome-shaped Buddhist monuments, cover the landscape in tightly packed rows. Some are only a few feet tall, others rise slightly higher, but none approach the monumental scale associated with the great Buddhist structures of South Asia. There are no massive ceremonial towers here comparable to Anuradhapura or Borobudur. Instead, the entire complex feels compressed, restrained, almost ritualistic in its repetition. From above, the site looks less like a traditional temple complex and more like a field of stone markers emerging from the earth. The density of these structures has led researchers to debate their purpose for decades. Some believe they were reliquary stupas containing sacred remains or cremation ashes of monks. Others argue they formed part of a ceremonial landscape designed for ritual movement and meditation. A few researchers have suggested they may represent a local architectural tradition that disappeared entirely from later Buddhist history. The problem is that no definitive explanation fully accounts for why so many nearly identical structures were concentrated in such a limited area. That uncertainty gives the site its eerie atmosphere. Kandarodai does not resemble the triumphant architecture of an empire displaying power through scale. Instead, it feels intimate and coded, as though its builders were following ceremonial rules no longer understood. The construction methods add another layer to the mystery. Many structures were built using limestone and coral stone gathered from the surrounding coastal environment. These materials were practical for a humid maritime climate, resistant to heat and relatively accessible. But their survival over centuries of monsoon weather is remarkable. Despite erosion, conflict, vegetation growth, and human occupation, large portions of the complex endured long enough for archaeologists to uncover them in the 20th century. And that rediscovery came surprisingly late. For centuries, much of Kandarodai remained buried beneath layers of soil and modern habitation. Villages slowly expanded across the ancient landscape, reusing stones and building over forgotten foundations. Unlike world-famous archaeological sites that were continuously documented throughout history, Kandarodai faded almost completely from historical consciousness. By the time serious excavations began, much of the original city had already disappeared beneath later settlement. This partial destruction created another historical puzzle. Archaeologists uncovered fragments of a sophisticated urban centre, but not enough survived to fully reconstruct what the city once looked like. Roads, domestic structures, trade goods, burial evidence, and religious architecture all emerged in pieces rather than as a complete preserved city. The result is a site defined as much by absence as discovery. Historians are forced to reconstruct the civilization through scattered remnants. Even more disruptive is what the ruins imply about the religious history of northern Sri Lanka. Today, the Jaffna Peninsula is heavily associated with Tamil Hindu culture. Yet Kandarodai demonstrates that a major Buddhist presence existed here centuries earlier. This has profound implications for understanding the island's cultural evolution. At some point, the Buddhist identity of the region either diminished, transformed, or vanished altogether. But exactly how this transition occurred remains unclear. There is no single event that cleanly explains the disappearance of the religious system that built Kandarodai. Wars, political shifts, maritime competition, environmental pressures, and changing demographics may all have played roles. But the archaeological record remains incomplete. In many ways, the site represents a missing chapter in Sri Lankan history. Adding to the intrigue are the legends connected to the region. Ancient Sri Lankan chronicles and South Asian traditions frequently mention the mysterious Naga people, semi-legendary, serpent-associated communities said to inhabit coastal and island territories around Sri Lanka. While historians separate mythology from archaeology cautiously, some researchers have noted that northern Sri Lanka, including areas around Kandaradai, was historically linked to these traditions. Whether the connection is symbolic, cultural, or entirely mythical remains uncertain. But the overlap between legend and archaeology only deepens the aura surrounding the ruins, and visually, Kandaradai possesses a completely different energy from most ancient sites commonly seen in documentaries. There are no giant walls or monumental entrances, no polished marble corridors or towering stone kings. The ruins sit low against the earth, surrounded by tropical vegetation and open sky. Wind moves quietly between the stone domes. The architecture feels exposed yet hidden at the same time, as though the city was gradually swallowed not by catastrophe, but by time itself. That subtlety may be why the site remained overlooked for so long. Kandaradai does not overwhelm visitors through size, it unsettles through implication. A forgotten port city connected to the ancient global economy. A Buddhist centre that vanished from a region where its presence is barely remembered today. A ceremonial landscape whose true function is still debated. A city erased so thoroughly that modern history almost failed to notice it existed. Far into the deserts of northern Mexico, where heat fractures the earth and dry winds move across endless plains of dust and stone, the ruins of Paquimé rise from the landscape like the remains of a civilization that should never have existed here at all. From a distance, the site appears almost fragile. Walls of sun-dried adobe, crumbling earth-coloured corridors, broken courtyards swallowed by silence. But beneath these ruins lies one of the strangest urban systems ever discovered in ancient North America. Underground chambers, hidden passageways, ritual spaces buried below the desert floor, hydraulic engineering that transformed an arid wasteland into a functioning city, and evidence of long-distance trade networks stretching across thousands of kilometres. For centuries, Paquimé remained abandoned beneath layers of sand and erosion, its purpose forgotten. Even now, archaeologists still cannot fully explain who built it, how such a massive settlement emerged in one of the harshest environments on the continent, or why it collapsed so suddenly. Because Paquimé was never supposed to become a city of this scale. Yet at its peak in the 13th and 14th centuries, it grew into a sprawling urban centre, containing thousands of interconnected rooms, ceremonial plazas, workshops, storage complexes, and subterranean chambers hidden beneath the surface of the desert itself. The scale of the settlement shocked early researchers. Northern Mexico was once viewed as a cultural frontier, a transitional zone between the civilizations of Mesoamerica and the Pueblo societies of the American Southwest. But Paquimé challenged that assumption completely. The city displayed signs of centralized planning on a level few expected to find in this region. Entire residential compounds were connected through maze-like corridors. Multi-story adobe buildings rose above the desert floor. T-shaped doorways appeared repeatedly throughout the site, echoing architectural traditions associated with ceremonial structures farther north in Chaco Canyon and Pueblo Bonito. Yet Paquimé was not simply copying another civilization. Its architecture combined influences from multiple cultural worlds into something uniquely its own. The city became a crossroads between distant societies, linking trade routes that carried turquoise, copper bells, marine shells, pottery, and exotic animals across enormous distances. But some of the most mysterious structures were not built above ground. They were hidden underneath it. Excavations revealed underground chambers unlike ordinary storage pits or domestic shelters. Some were carefully constructed below major architectural complexes, isolated from the intense desert heat above. Others appeared connected to ceremonial zones, suggesting they served purposes beyond simple practicality. Inside several chambers, archaeologists found traces of ash, burned material, animal remains, and ritual deposits. Their layouts often made little sense as living spaces. Narrow entrances restricted access. Certain rooms seemed designed for controlled movement rather than habitation. And in ancient cultures throughout the Americas, underground spaces frequently symbolized something far more significant than utility. They represented entrances into sacred worlds beneath the earth, places associated with death, rebirth, transformation, and communication with supernatural forces. This possibility transformed the underground chambers of Paquimé from architectural curiosities into something far more unsettling, because the city may have been designed around a symbolic relationship between the world above and the world below. Ritual movement through underground space appears repeatedly in ancient American belief systems. Ceremonial kivas among Pueblo societies, cave rituals across Mesoamerica, sacred subterranean chambers linked to cosmology, ancestry, and the cycle of life itself. At Paquimé, some researchers believe the underground structures formed part of a ceremonial network tied to elite rituals or religious authority. Others argue they may have functioned as controlled environments for storing valuable trade goods, maintaining food supplies, or regulating temperature in an extreme climate. The truth remains uncertain. But whatever their original purpose, the chambers suggest a city operating with a level of social organisation and symbolic complexity far beyond what was once imagined for this region. Even more remarkable was the engineering required to sustain the settlement. Paquimé existed in a landscape defined by drought. Rainfall was unpredictable, temperatures could become extreme, yet the city supported a large population for generations. Archaeologists uncovered canals, reservoirs, drainage systems, and carefully planned water distribution networks integrated directly into the urban layout. Water flowed through sections of the city using precisely managed gradients. Certain compounds appear to have had controlled access to water supplies, suggesting centralized administration and social hierarchy. In a desert environment, water was power. Whoever controlled it controlled the survival of the city itself. The engineering becomes even more astonishing when considering another discovery found within the ruins, macaques. Bright tropical scarlet macaques are native to humid forests hundreds of kilometers south of Paquimé. They do not belong in the deserts of Chihuahua. Yet archaeologists uncovered evidence that the inhabitants were not merely importing these birds occasionally. They were breeding them on a significant scale. Excavations revealed cages, feeding areas, eggshell fragments, and large quantities of macaque remains distributed throughout the settlement. The birds were likely symbols of status and religious power, their brilliant feathers associated with the sun, fertility, and elite authority across Mesoamerican cultures. But maintaining tropical birds in an arid environment would have required constant care, food, water, and organized infrastructure. The discovery revealed something extraordinary. Paquimé was not an isolated desert town struggling for survival. It was part of a vast economic and ceremonial network extending deep into ancient Mexico and across the American Southwest. The city's workshops reinforced this image of complexity. Artisans produced sophisticated ceramics with geometric patterns, unlike anything else in the region. Copper artifacts appeared alongside shell jewellery imported from distant coastlines. Trade goods flowed through the city from multiple directions. Some researchers have described Paquimé as one of the great forgotten trade capitals of pre-Columbian North America, a settlement positioned between worlds, absorbing influences from different civilizations while developing a culture that still remains only partially understood. And then, almost as suddenly as it rose, the city collapsed. Around the 15th century, Paquimé entered a period of destruction. Fires spread across sections of the settlement. Buildings were abandoned. Walls collapsed inward. Evidence suggests portions of the city may have been violently attacked or intentionally burned. But no single explanation fully accounts for the scale of the decline. Some researchers point toward prolonged drought and environmental stress. Others suspect political instability, conflict over trade routes, internal revolt, or the collapse of the authority structures that once held the city together. Whatever happened, the abandonment appears to have occurred rapidly. Underground chambers and ceremonial spaces were left behind beneath layers of debris and ash, preserving fragments of a civilization frozen in the moment of its disappearance. For centuries, the desert slowly reclaimed the city. Adobe walls eroded into the landscape. Wind carried dust through abandoned corridors. Entire sections vanished beneath the ground. And when archaeologists finally began systematic excavations, they uncovered not only the remains of a lost urban centre, but evidence that much of Paquimé may still remain buried beneath the desert floor even today. High in the cloud forests of northern Peru, hidden beneath layers of moss, roots, and permanent mountain fog, lies one of the most isolated ancient sites ever discovered in South America. Gran Payatén does not rise from an open valley like most famous archaeological ruins. It clings to the edge of steep Andean ridges nearly 3,000 meters above sea level, buried inside terrain so hostile and overgrown that for centuries the outside world barely knew it existed. Even today, large parts of the surrounding region remain unexplored. Archaeologists still do not know how extensive the settlement network truly was, how many structures remain hidden beneath the forest canopy, or why a civilization chose to build monumental stone architecture in one of the most unforgiving mountain jungles on Earth. Gran Payatén is associated with the mysterious Chachapoya civilization, a culture the Inca reportedly called the Warriors of the Clouds. Long before the arrival of the Spanish, the Chachapoya established settlements across the cloud forests of the Andes, constructing fortified cities, cliff tombs, ceremonial complexes, and elevated mountain sanctuaries in locations that appear almost impossible to inhabit. Unlike the Inca, whose roads and cities stretched across open mountain landscapes, the Chachapoya disappeared into fog, jungle, and vertical terrain. Their world was one of hidden ridges, steep valleys, and forests that could erase entire cities within generations. The existence of Gran Payatén remained largely unknown to the modern world until the 20th century. Although local communities may have known fragments of its location, the site entered international attention during expeditions in the 1960s, led by explorer Jean Savoy. Reaching the ruins was itself a brutal undertaking. Dense vegetation covered the mountaintops. Slopes collapsed beneath heavy rain. Visibility could disappear within minutes as clouds rolled across the ridges. When parts of the forest were finally cleared, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary. Massive circular stone structures emerged from beneath the vegetation, like ghosts resurfacing after centuries underground. What made the discovery immediately unusual was the architecture itself. The structures at Gran Payatén did not resemble the rectangular stone planning commonly associated with imperial Inca construction. Instead, Many buildings were circular, elevated on artificial terraces carved directly into steep mountain slopes. Some walls were decorated with white stone mosaic friezes depicting geometric patterns and stylized human figures with outstretched arms. In the dim light of the cloud forest, these pale figures appear almost spectral against the dark stone and surrounding vegetation. Their meaning remains uncertain. Some researchers believe they represented ancestors, ritual figures, or cosmological symbols connected to Chachapoya spiritual beliefs. Others argue they may have served as markers of status or ceremonial identity. No definitive explanation exists. The engineering challenge behind Grand Payaten is one of the site's greatest mysteries. Cloud forests are among the worst environments imaginable for long-term stone construction. Constant humidity weakens foundations. Heavy rainfall destabilizes slopes. Vegetation forces roots through cracks in masonry. Landslides regularly reshape the terrain. Yet the Chachapoya not only built here, they created monumental architecture designed to endure for centuries. Entire platforms had to be carved into unstable mountainsides before structures could even be erected. Drainage systems were likely essential, though many remain hidden beneath collapsed debris and vegetation. The fact that portions of the complex survived at all suggests an advanced understanding of terrain stabilization in extreme environmental conditions. For decades, archaeologists believed Grand Payaten was a relatively isolated ceremonial center, deep within the mountains. But newer surveys have begun to challenge that interpretation. Remote sensing technologies and aerial studies indicate the surrounding forests may conceal a much larger network of Chachapoya settlements connected across the region. Beneath the jungle canopy could lie roads, terraces, storage facilities, defensive structures, and additional ceremonial compounds still untouched by excavation. Some researchers now suspect Grand Payaten was not a lone sanctuary but part of an extensive hidden civilization spread through the cloud forests of northern Peru. That possibility transforms the site into something far more significant. It raises the unsettling idea that entire chapters of Andean history remain concealed beneath vegetation so dense modern archaeology can barely penetrate it. Unlike deserts that preserve ruins in plain sight, tropical mountain forests actively consume the past. Stone disappears beneath moss. Stairways collapse under root systems. Buildings vanish beneath layers of soil and organic growth, until entire cities become invisible from only a short distance away. The isolation of Grand Payaten may also explain why the Chachapoya remained enigmatic even during the height of the Inca Empire. Historical accounts suggest the Inca struggled to fully control the region. The terrain itself functioned as a natural fortress. Narrow mountain passages, hidden ridges, and unpredictable weather created defensive advantages no conventional army could easily overcome. By the time Spanish chroniclers recorded information about the Chachapoya, much of their independent culture had already been fractured by war, disease, and forced integration into the expanding imperial systems around them. What remains today is fragmented. Unlike civilizations that left behind large written records, the Chachapoya survived mostly through architecture, burial sites, and scattered references written by outsiders. Their beliefs, political systems, rituals, and daily life remain only partially understood. Grand Payaten therefore occupies a strange space in archaeology. It is not merely a ruined city. It is evidence of how much has been lost. There are signs the site may have served ceremonial rather than purely residential purposes. The extreme difficulty of access raises obvious questions. Why transport stone, labour and resources to such dangerous elevations unless the location itself held spiritual meaning? Across the Andes, mountains were often regarded as sacred entities connected to cosmology, ancestors, and divine forces. Grand Pachaten's placement above the clouds may not have been accidental. It may have been intended to exist in a symbolic space between worlds, suspended between earth, jungle, and sky. High above the fractured mountains of northern Tigray, where sheer walls of sandstone rise like natural fortresses above the clouds, entire sanctuaries exist in places that seem fundamentally hostile to human survival. Some are hidden inside caves suspended hundreds of feet above the valley floor. Others are carved directly into vertical cliffs so dangerous that even reaching them today requires climbing without ropes, along ledges barely wide enough for a single foot. For centuries, these places remained isolated from the outside world, protected not by walls or armies, but by geography itself. Known collectively as the Cliff Sanctuaries of Tigray, they represent one of the most extreme architectural traditions ever attempted by a pre-modern civilization. And unlike many famous ancient wonders that were built to display power, wealth, or imperial dominance, these structures appear to have been created for an entirely different reason: isolation, faith, separation from the world below. The most famous of these sanctuaries is Abuna Yamata-gu, a church embedded into a vertical cliff face at an altitude that feels closer to an eagle's nest than a human settlement. Reaching it even now is an ordeal. The ascent requires scrambling barefoot across smooth rock, climbing exposed cliff sections with no protective barriers, and traversing narrow ledges that fall directly into open air. There are moments during the climb when the valley floor becomes almost impossible to look at without vertigo. Yet for over 1,000 years, priests, pilgrims, monks, and local worshippers made this journey regularly. The question is immediate and unavoidable. Why build a sanctuary in a location so inaccessible that simply reaching it could kill you? Inside, the atmosphere changes completely. The harsh landscape outside gives way to a chamber covered in ancient paintings, faded but still visible beneath centuries of dust and smoke. Saints stare from the ceiling in vivid reds, yellows, and deep earth pigments. Arches and columns emerge directly from the mountain itself. Nothing here was assembled piece by piece. The church was not constructed on the cliff. It was carved into it. Every wall, every ceiling, every support column was cut directly from solid stone by human hands working at extreme altitude with limited tools and almost no margin for error. And Abuna Yamata-gu is only one sanctuary among many. Across Tigray, more than 100 rock-hewn churches and monasteries are scattered through cliffs, caves, mountains, and isolated plateaus. Some remain active places of worship today, others are nearly forgotten, accessible only to local villagers or monks who still guard ancient traditions in near-total isolation. Unlike Petra or Cappadocia, the sanctuaries of Tigray were never designed as urban centres or commercial hubs. They were hidden worlds, spiritual refuges deliberately removed from ordinary civilization. Many historians believe these cliff sanctuaries began appearing between the 5th and 14th centuries during the rise of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. Christianity reached the Kingdom of Aksum remarkably early, becoming one of the first state religions on earth long before much of Europe converted. But while great churches rose in cities and royal capitals, another movement was emerging deep within the mountains. Ascetic monks sought locations where physical hardship became part of spiritual devotion itself. Isolation was not an obstacle, it was the purpose. This philosophy may explain why so many sanctuaries occupy seemingly impossible terrain. Some monasteries were intentionally hidden from invading forces. Others were positioned high above valleys to symbolize spiritual elevation above earthly life. But practical mysteries remain. How were these churches carved with such precision on unstable cliffs? How are tools, water, food, manuscripts and pigments transported to elevations that are dangerous even for modern climbers? In some locations, there is barely enough flat ground for a person to stand, yet entire chambers were excavated directly into the mountain face. The engineering itself is astonishingly sophisticated. Many sanctuaries were designed to work with the natural geology rather than against it. Builders exploited existing cracks in the stone, used overhanging rock for natural protection against erosion, and carved entrances in ways that minimized exposure to direct rain and sunlight. Some churches contain ventilation systems and drainage channels integrated subtly into the rock. Others maintain remarkably stable interior temperatures despite the brutal heat outside. The mountain itself became part of the architecture. One of the most mysterious monasteries is Debri Demo, a religious complex isolated atop a flat-topped mountain surrounded by sheer cliffs. For centuries, the only access route was a leather rope lowered from above. Visitors literally had to be pulled upward into the monastery by monks waiting at the summit. According to tradition, this isolation protected sacred manuscripts and relics during periods of war and instability. But it also transformed the monastery into something almost mythological, a hidden fortress suspended above the world. Inside many of these sanctuaries are treasures rarely discussed outside Ethiopia. Ancient manuscripts written in Ge'ez, one of the oldest liturgical languages still in use, survive within these mountain churches. Handwritten parchment texts, illuminated religious works, ceremonial crosses, and centuries-old relics have remained preserved largely because of isolation. In some cases, the dry mountain climate and limited human interference created natural preservation conditions rivaling sealed tombs. Then there are the paintings. Some frescoes inside the churches retain surprisingly strong pigmentation despite their age. Certain scholars believe local mineral compounds derived from volcanic geology contributed to their durability. The result is surreal. Paintings that have survived for centuries on the walls of sanctuaries hanging above open cliffs in one of the harshest environments imaginable. Images suspended between earth and sky. Deep inside the forests of northwestern Cambodia, hidden beneath collapsing stone corridors and enormous strangler roots, lies one of the most haunting monuments ever built by the Khmer Empire. Beng Mialia does not look like a preserved archaeological site. It looks like the aftermath of a vanished civilization. Massive sandstone blocks lie scattered across the jungle floor, as if the entire temple had been torn apart from the inside. Towers lean at impossible angles. Hallways disappear beneath centuries of vegetation. Trees erupt directly through ancient walls, wrapping themselves around the ruins like living serpents reclaiming forgotten territory. Unlike Angkor Wat, which was gradually restored and stabilized, Beng Mialia remained almost untouched for centuries, and that abandonment may be exactly what makes it one of the most visually extraordinary ancient sites on Earth. Built during the early 12th century, under the reign of King Suryavarman II, the same ruler associated with Angkor Wat, Beng Mialia was once an enormous religious complex covering more than 1 square kilometre. The temple sits along the ancient royal road, connecting Angkor to the eastern regions of the Khmer Empire, suggesting it may have served not only as a sacred site, but also as a strategic gateway deep within the imperial network. Yet despite its immense scale and sophisticated architecture, Beng Mialia almost vanished from historical memory. Unlike many major Khmer temples, it contains relatively few inscriptions explaining its purpose, its rituals, or the details of its construction. Much of its story was swallowed by the jungle long before modern archaeology arrived. The first thing that separates Beng Mialia from other ancient temples is the overwhelming sense of collapse. Entire galleries have caved inward. Stone ceilings weighing several tons now rest in chaotic piles across narrow passageways. Staircases lead nowhere. Courtyards are split apart by giant roots thicker than human bodies. Walking through the ruins feels less like entering a temple, and more like exploring the skeleton of a civilization that lost a war against nature itself. For centuries, tropical vegetation slowly forced its way into cracks between the stones. As roots expanded year after year, they acted like hydraulic wedges, prying apart structures that had once survived monsoon seasons, invasions, and dynastic collapse. What remains today is a bizarre fusion of architecture and rainforest, where neither can be separated from the other. Yet beneath the destruction lies evidence of extraordinary engineering. Bengmialia was constructed primarily from sandstone blocks, transported across enormous distances without modern machinery. Many sections were assembled with astonishing precision, using tightly interlocked stone joints that required little or no mortar. Even after centuries of collapse, some corridors remain partially intact because of the accuracy of their original construction. Archaeologists still debate the logistics behind Khmer stone transportation on this scale. Tens of thousands of blocks had to be quarried, shaped, transported through dense terrain, and lifted into position long before the existence of industrial cranes or powered vehicles. The Khmer Empire achieved this while simultaneously constructing massive reservoirs, canals, highways, and some of the largest religious monuments in human history. The layout of Bengmialia also reveals striking similarities to Angkor Wat. Both temples share comparable galleries, courtyards, libraries, and concentric enclosures, leading many researchers to suspect that Bengmialia may have served as an architectural precursor or experimental prototype for the more famous complex. But unlike Angkor Wat, Bengmialia was largely consumed by collapse before large-scale restoration could preserve its original appearance. That destruction has created one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the site. Why did Bengmialia deteriorate so completely while other Khmer monuments survived in far better condition? Some experts point toward unstable foundations and centuries of unchecked vegetation growth. Others suspect that regional conflict, abandonment, looting, or long-term structural weaknesses accelerated the destruction. There is no definitive answer. The temple appears less like a ruin shaped by a single catastrophic event, and more like a monument slowly dismantled over hundreds of years. Hidden among the debris are remnants of the artistic world that once filled these halls. Carvings of Naga serpents stretch along collapsed balustrades. Fragments of Apsara dances still emerge from broken walls. Hindu mythological scenes associated with Vishnu can still be identified despite severe erosion. Many sculptures were damaged either by looters or by the relentless climate of Cambodia's tropical forests. Monsoon rains, humidity, heat, biological growth, and shifting routes gradually erased details that once represented the spiritual and political power of the Khmer Empire. In some areas, entire carvings have become nearly unrecognizable, as though the jungle itself attempted to erase the memory of the civilization that built them. One of the most fascinating aspects of Bengmialia is how isolated it once felt. Before modern access roads and tourism infrastructure, reaching the site required moving through dense forest, where visibility could vanish within meters. For generations, local communities knew of the ruins, but the wider world paid relatively little attention to the temple compared to Angkor Wat. That isolation preserved an atmosphere rarely found at major archaeological landmarks today. Even now, Bengmialia retains a sense of unpredictability. Wooden walkways twist above unstable stone fields. Dark openings descend into collapsed chambers. Narrow passages vanish beneath tangled roots and fallen ceilings. It feels less like a curated museum and more like an active archaeological wilderness. The surrounding environment may also hold clues to a much larger story. Like many Khmer sites, Bengmialia was connected to sophisticated water management systems involving moats, reservoirs, and engineered channels. The Khmer Empire did not merely construct temples, it reshaped entire landscapes. At its peak, Angkor supported one of the most advanced hydraulic civilizations on Earth, capable of controlling seasonal floodwaters across vast regions. Some researchers believe environmental instability and failures within this enormous water network may have contributed to the gradual decline of the empire itself. Bengmialia therefore exists not as an isolated ruin, but as part of a gigantic interconnected system that once sustained millions of people.